Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today we're diving deep into some wisdom that might just surprise you with how deep it is and, how relevant it is to us even today.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about Sunan Abu Dawud,
Okay.
specifically Book 14,
Uh-huh.
which focuses on funerals.
Funerals. You might think a book about funerals would be pretty, straightforward.
Yeah,
But this one, it's really interesting. It offers a really unique look into how Islam views life and death,
yeah,
even the afterlife.
it's so true. And it's not just like a how-to manual for burial rituals.
Yeah.
It's like it's woven together with these really profound, reflections
Yeah.
on how we're supposed to live a meaningful life.
Yeah.
Knowing that death is going to happen to all of us.
It's a part of the journey. And that's what I think is so fascinating because it really prompts us to think about, how our actions in this world actually carry over into the next.
Totally. It's almost like having a conversation with somebody
Yeah.
who's looking back on life from the other side
Yeah.
and sharing all these insights with us.
Yeah, and I think what's really striking is how the book actually begins.
Okay.
It doesn't start with the practicalities of death.
Right.
It starts with, reflecting on illness and divine decree.
It's like it's saying, okay, before we even talk about death, let's understand how to, go through the tough parts of life.
Right.
Because those are the things that shape us and get us ready.
For what's to come.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hadith 3083 really dives into this concept.
Okay.
And it highlights how a believer's illness can actually be a form of atonement for their sins, almost like a warning to guide their future actions.
Wow. So there's this contrast
Yeah.
in the hadith
Uh-huh.
between how a believer and a hypocrite view illness, right?
Actually.
So for the believer, it's a chance to grow spiritually,
Yeah.
a chance to turn back to Allah and really ask for forgiveness.
It's like a wake-up call,
Yeah.
reminding us that we are vulnerable and
Yeah.
that we depend on Allah's mercy.
So it makes us look at what's really important and, make amends for anything we did wrong.
But then for the hypocrite,
Yeah.
it's just a meaningless interruption.
We just don't get it.
They don't get it. They're clueless.
Yeah.
The hadith actually describes them as being like a camel that's been tied up and then let loose, clueless about the reason behind it all.
Wow.
They just go back to their old ways as soon as they feel better.
So they're totally missing the point.
They're missing the whole point.
It makes me think we really need to approach these challenges in life with an open heart, and a seeking mind.
You have to, because there are hidden blessings and
Yeah.
opportunities for so much spiritual growth.
And there's this beautiful story in the hadith that really brings this idea to life.
Oh, I love this story.
Me too. It's about a man who caught some baby birds
Uh-huh.
and he put them in his clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine? Like these tiny little birds, all chirping and fluttering, trying to get out.
I can just imagine.
Their mother, when she sees this happen.
He freaks out.
Oh, absolutely.
She's hovering over the sky. Yeah.
So worried about her babies.
Yeah. And the prophet, peace be upon him, uses this whole scenario to teach a really profound lesson about Allah's love and mercy.
A powerful lesson.
He asks his companions, "Are you surprised by how much this mother bird loves her babies?" And they obviously say yes. And then he says, "I swear by him who has sent me with the truth, Allah is more affectionate to his servants than this mother is to her young ones."
It's such a strong image,
It is.
to help us really understand how much Allah loves us.
If a mother bird can show that much love and protection just on instinct,
Right.
imagine how much greater the love of our Creator is.
It's amazing.
The one who knows everything and is all
It
merciful.
reminds us we are never alone.
Yeah.
Even when we're lost or feeling overwhelmed, Allah's with us, guiding us, loving us.
And so this story just completely changes how you think about hardship. It's not a punishment.
It can be an expression of love,
Yeah.
a way to become closer to Allah.
To purify our hearts. And Hadith 384 goes on to say that sometimes Allah might give us illness, or we might lose property or have challenges with our children, not as a punishment, but to elevate us to a rank we haven't earned through actions alone.
Wow, so that's a challenge to how we usually think about suffering.
It is. It shows that sometimes Allah tests us not to break us, but to make us stronger,
To refine us
purify our intentions.
and to raise our spiritual station,
Like a fire that burns away what's not pure.
leaving behind something beautiful and strong.
Think of it this way. Sometimes the most beautiful pearls are deep in the ocean.
Okay.
And sometimes the greatest spiritual rewards come from going through the hardest things in life.
with patience.
and perseverance.
That's deep. It really changes how you see the tough things we go through.
It does. It makes you see trials as chances to grow, to get closer to Allah.
Okay, so what does that mean for us practically? It means we need to cultivate patience and acceptance
Understanding.
when things are hard,
It's about trusting Allah.
knowing He won't give us more than we can handle.
And that brings us to the next set of hadiths, which are all about community and supporting each other,
Okay.
especially when we're in need. So we've been really diving deep into how Sunan Abu Dawud encourages us to see those trials and tribulations as like chances to grow spiritually and get closer to Allah,
Yeah.
which I think is like the foundation for understanding Islam's whole approach to death and the rituals around it.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it doesn't avoid talking about death,
Right.
Even when it's telling us how to live a meaningful life, it doesn't try to make it sound better than it is. It just says, okay, death is a powerful thing. It can even be scary sometimes.
Exactly. And Hadith 3104 really captures this like raw reality of it
Yeah.
with this short but powerful statement. Sudden death is a wrathful catching.
Whoa, that does sound a little intense at first,
Yeah.
But if you think about it, if death is seen as moving on to the afterlife, meeting with Allah, then being caught suddenly could mean you're not ready for that meeting, right?
That's it. It's like being caught off guard
Yeah.
without having done the spiritual work you need to do for that journey.
So it's a big reminder that we're accountable to Allah
Right.
and that we have to live righteously because we never know when our time's going to come.
We really don't. So live every day like it matters.
So true. And then there's Hadith 3105, which tells the story of Abdullah ibn Thabit's death
Okay.
and how the Prophet responded. It's a really moving story with so much guidance in it about how we're supposed to deal with death.
Absolutely. First of all, it reminds us of that fundamental Islamic belief. We belong to Allah and we're going back to him.
Right.
When the Prophet, peace be upon him, heard about Abdullah ibn Thabit's death,
Yeah.
he immediately said the verse, "Verily, we belong to Allah, and verily to him do we return."
It's such a powerful statement.
It is.
It's like total acceptance of Allah's will.
Surrender.
Recognizing that our lives are in his hands and we're just passing through this world.
This world is temporary.
Exactly. The Hadith also talks about how Muslims should grieve. The Prophet said not to wail too much or, get super lost in despair.
Right.
Which, it might seem strange, but it makes sense when you think about how Islam teaches us to be patient
And have fortitude.
in the face of Allah's decree.
It's natural to be sad, of course.
Yeah.
But Islam teaches us to channel that sadness in a healthy way
Without forgetting our faith.
and our trust in Allah's wisdom.
So it's about balancing the pain of loss with the understanding that death is part of Allah's plan.
Exactly. It's a transition to a whole other way of existing.
And then there's this really interesting part about different types of martyrdom.
Oh, yeah. This is fascinating.
It's not just dying in battle, which is what most people think of, right?
Yeah, a lot of people associate martyrdom with fighting in a war.
But the Hadith says martyrdom can also be from things like the plague,
Drowning.
even childbirth,
Wow.
because these are all ways of dying that are out of our control,
It's surrendering to Allah's will.
And it shows that your intentions and what you get from Allah are connected.
Because even in those deaths that seem tragic or unexpected,
Yeah.
there's a lot of spiritual merit if the person's heart was with Allah.
It's pretty amazing. It shows that you can get to a high spiritual place in a lot of different ways.
Not just by being a hero in battle.
But by dealing with life's difficulties with faith,
And submission.
I love how those hadiths connect practical guidance with spiritual insights,
It's so well done.
giving us this amazing way to understand death and all the feelings that come with it.
Yeah. And building on that understanding,
Okay.
the book then goes into the more practical stuff, like
Yeah.
the actual Islamic rites and practices for funerals. It's super detailed.
I know. It's like a step-by-step guide for everything, getting the body ready,
That funeral prayer.
the procession. And these details aren't just random rules. They have meaning behind them. They reflect really important Islamic beliefs.
For example, Hadith 3108 says that when you die, you'll be raised in the clothes you died in. That's why Abu Sa'id al-Khudri asked for new clothes when he was close to death.
That's interesting. Changing your clothes can have such deep meaning,
It shows that this life and the next are connected.
So we should prepare for meeting Allah just like we prepare for important events in this world.
Exactly.
And then there's the recommendation to recite Surah Yasin for those who are dying.
From Hadith 31 and 15.
Right. Surah Yasin is such a powerful chapter in the Quran. It's all about blessings, mercy, and thinking about the afterlife.
Reciting it for someone who's close to death is an act of deep compassion and support,
It's like reminding them of Allah's power and mercy.
offering them comfort in their final moments.
And it shows that even at the very end of life,
There's still a chance to seek forgiveness and blessings from Allah.
death isn't a sudden stop,
It's a transition.
and we can keep praying for those who are passing.
Hadith 301-17 offers a perspective on visiting people who are grieving.
Oh.
It talks about how Fatima, the Prophet's daughter,
Yeah.
went to console a family who had lost someone.
She had good intentions.
The best. But
Yeah.
the Prophet actually advised against going to the graveyard too often.
That seems a little counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does, but it's about balance, you know?
Okay.
Balancing compassion with the possibility of getting lost in grief.
Or becoming too attached to this world.
Visiting graves can remind us of death and the afterlife.
But we have to be careful not to dwell on the past or fixate on the physical remains of loved ones.
It can distract us from living a good life now.
So it's about channeling that grief in a healthy way, remembering those we've lost, but also focusing on our spiritual growth and our duties here in this world.
And that idea of balance is also seen in the hadiths that criticize excessive mourning.
Like Hadith 3122, 310124, and 3125.
Those are the ones. They're very clear about denouncing things like loud wailing, shaving your head, tearing clothes, even taking oaths to do those things.
Right. Those things were common in some cultures back then, but they go against what Islam teaches about being patient and accepting death.
It's like despairing or rebelling against Allah's will.
Which doesn't fit with how Islam tells us to surrender to his decree and find peace in his mercy.
Exactly. We need to remember death is a natural part of life,
It's a transition we'll all go through,
and we should face it with composure and dignity.
trusting in Allah's plan.
And this brings us to the next group of hadiths, which go into detail about preparing the body for burial.
This is where it gets really specific.
It is. It outlines the steps for washing and shrouding the deceased with so much respect and reverence.
And it's fascinating how those practical details have spiritual significance too,
Yeah.
showing how important the human body is in Islam, even after death.
Exactly. And we see this reflected in all the different scenarios and rulings.
So we were talking about how detailed the instructions are in the Sunan Abu Dawud about getting the body ready for burial. It really shows you that even in death, the human body is treated with so much dignity and respect.
Oh, absolutely. The way they wash and shroud the body, it's done so carefully. It shows that they believe the soul might be gone, but the body that it was in, it's still sacred.
It's not just about keeping things clean, is it? It's about honoring the person who died, preparing them for that last journey.
And these hadiths, they cover all sorts of situations, which shows you how flexible and wise Islamic law is.
Like Hadith 301 and 27, right?
Mhm.
It describes this man who died from an arrow wound. Because of what happened, they just shrouded him in the clothes he was already wearing.
Right, they had to be practical, you know? Consider the situation.
So the point is to cover the body in a clean and respectful way. And sometimes the simplest way is the best way.
Exactly.
But then you see a different approach with the martyrs of Uhud in Hadiths 3128 and 3129.
Oh, yeah.
They took off their weapons and any animal skins, but they were buried with their blood in clothes. And they didn't do the ritual washing.
That's because they died fighting for Allah. That's a special honor.
Their sacrifice is remembered in a different way, and how they're buried shows how they died. Hadith 3130 is so powerful. It tells the story of Hamza, the Prophet's uncle. He was killed in battle, and his body was really badly hurt.
I remember this one. It's heartbreaking.
At first, the Prophet thought about not burying him at all. He thought maybe Hamza would be resurrected from the animals that might eat his body.
That's a strong image. It really shows you what they believed about resurrection.
And I think it shows how much the Prophet loved his uncle, even wanting him to come back whole and pure.
But then, because he saw how much his Aunt Safiya was grieving, he decided to bury Hamza after all.
That's so touching. Even with all the chaos of war, even with all these religious rules, compassion is so important.
And you know, this hadith also shows you the tough situation those early Muslims were in. Sometimes they didn't have enough cloth, so they'd wrap 2 or 3 people in one garment and bury them in the same grave.
Wow, can you imagine? They had so little, but they still wanted to honor the dead the best way they could.
And they even had a rule. The person who knew the most Quran was placed closest to the Qibla, the direction they pray to.
So even in death, knowledge and being close to Allah were important to them. Hadith 3134 is really interesting. It says you shouldn't uncover your thigh or look at the thigh of someone living or dead.
It's about modesty, right? even after death.
Exactly. It shows how important haya is in Islam. That means modesty, humility, respect for yourself and others. And it doesn't end when you die. And then there's Hadith 3135. It tells about a time when they weren't sure what to do when the Prophet himself died.
Oh, wow.
His wives didn't know how to wash and shroud him. They had so much respect for him, they wanted to do everything perfectly right.
Makes sense. He was their leader, but also their prophet.
And then something amazing happened. A voice they couldn't see told him to wash him with his clothes on.
It's like even in that moment of grief and confusion, Allah was guiding them.
So powerful.
Mhm.
And then the Sunan Abu Dawud goes into a lot of detail about the kinds of shrouds you should use, from Hadiths 3144 to 3151.
Right. Keep it simple, keep it practical, use clean materials that show respect, no need to be fancy.
The important thing is to prepare the person for meeting Allah, not to show off.
And then Hadith 3153, it says to bury the person quickly, no need to wait around.
It's like showing respect,
Yeah.
and understanding that death is just a natural part of life. Things move on.
It does. And from there, the Sunan Abu Dawud moves on to the funeral prayer and the burial, explaining all the etiquette and the meaning behind it all.
It's like a whole guidebook taking you through each step.
Hadith 3154 is interesting. It says that the Prophet would take a bath after washing the body of someone who had died.
Even though washing the dead is a way of purifying yourself ritually, he still did another purification afterward.
It shows how seriously they took death and how they approached these rituals with a lot of reverence and purity.
And Hadith 3155 adds to that. It says that whoever washes the body should bathe, and whoever carries the body should do ablution. That's the ritual washing before prayer.
So you purify yourself before and after dealing with the deceased. It's recognizing how sacred this whole process is.
These practices show how important it is to be mindful and spiritually aware when you're dealing with death. It's not just going through the motions, it's understand what's happening and showing the person who died the ultimate respect.
And even with all these detailed instructions, you still see moments of real human emotion and the strong bonds between those early Muslims.
Yeah, like Hadith 3157. It says the Prophet kissed Uthman ibn Mazun after he died and he cried.
Even the Prophet, peace be upon him, felt grief and sorrow. It's normal. It's part of being human.
It shows how close they were, how much love the Prophet had for his companions. Hadith 3158 is a little mysterious. People saw fire or light in the graveyard, and when they went to see what it was, they found the Prophet in a grave, asking for the companion of a man who used to pray really loudly.
It's hard to know exactly what it means, but it makes you think that what you do in this life matters after you die.
It's like we'll be judged for our actions, even after death. And it makes you think about how there might still be a sense of community even in the grave. The Prophet was there, and he was worried about his companion. It's like those bonds don't disappear when we die. It's a powerful idea. Hadith 3159 says that the martyrs of Uhud were supposed to be buried somewhere else, but then the Prophet said to bury them right where they fell.
That way they were honored where they made their sacrifice. It became a place to remember them.
It shows how brave they were, how much they gave for Islam.
And then you get into the specifics of the funeral prayer. Hadith 3160 says that if 3 rows of Muslims pray over someone who's died, that person is guaranteed paradise.
But praying together as a community is really important. It helps the person in their journey to the afterlife.
But Hadith 3165 says not to wail loudly or use fire during the funeral procession. Keep things calm and dignified. Focus on praying and asking for Allah's mercy, not on making a big show of grief.
And Hadith 3170 shows how the Prophet would change his practices sometimes. He used to stand up during a funeral until the body was in the grave, but then he stopped doing it because a Jewish man said they did the same thing.
Even though there was nothing wrong with standing up, he didn't want to look like he was copying another religion.
It shows how important it was for Islam to have its own distinct practices. And then you have Hadith 3171 to 3178, which give you all these rules about how to act during a funeral procession.
Like, don't run, but walk quickly. Where to stand if you're riding an animal or walking.
It's all about being respectful, being orderly, making sure the focus is on honoring the person who died and taking them to their final resting place.
It's a serious occasion.
And they even tell you how to pray over a baby that was miscarried and ask for forgiveness and mercy for its parents.
That's so compassionate. It shows how much respect they had for all life, even one that didn't get to live very long. Hadiths 3179 to 3182 talk about times when the Prophet wouldn't pray over someone, like a man who committed suicide. It shows you that things aren't always so simple. You have to consider each situation.
Islamic law is smart, It has general rules, but it's also flexible enough to deal with different situations.
And as we get closer to the funeral prayer itself, Hadith 3185 says it's okay to pray over the dead person in the mosque. The mosque is a place for the whole community, not just for happy times, but also for supporting each other when someone dies.
Right. And Hadiths 3187 and 3188 tell you exactly where to put the body during the prayer.
For a young boy, you put the body near the imam, the prayer leader. For a man, the imam stands near the head, and for a woman, near the hips.
So they have rules for everything, making sure the prayer is respectful and done the right way. Even in death, they respected these differences.
They did.
And Hadiths 3193 to 3196 say to pray sincerely for the person who died, asking for forgiveness, mercy, and strength for them, because they'll be questioned in the grave.
They believe that even after death, the journey of the soul continues, and they need our prayers.
We can still help them, even after they're gone.
And when the prayer's done and they start to bury the person, Hadith 3200 says that the Prophet marked the grave of Uthman ibn Mazun with a stone so he would know where it was. And he said he wanted his family to be buried next to him.
It shows that it's important to bury people properly, to have a place to remember them. And it shows how strong family ties are, even after death.
It's beautiful.
In Hadith 3201, the Prophet said that breaking a dead person's bone is just as bad as breaking it when they were alive.
It shows you how much respect they had for the body, even after the person was gone. The body held a soul, and it deserves to be treated with care.
Hadith 3202 explains the way Muslims bury people. They make a niche in the side of the grave. For others, they dig a hole in the middle. It's part of what makes Islamic burials unique.
It shows how they had their own way of doing things, even in death.
And Hadith 32203 and 3205 tell you exactly who washed the Prophet's body and how to put the body in the grave. It's all about doing things the right way, following the Sunnah, which is the Prophet's example.
It's a guidebook for how to do it all.
Hadith 3214 describes the graves of the Prophet and his two closest friends, Abu Bakr and Umar. They were simple graves, not fancy at all, just covered with pebbles in an open space.
It shows you how humble they were, even in death. It wasn't about having a big, fancy tomb. It was about returning to the earth simply and respectfully.
And Hadith 3215 says that the Prophet would stay by the grave after the burial and tell people to ask forgiveness for the person and pray for them to stay strong, because they would be questioned in the grave.
They believed that life after death is real and that we can still help those who have passed on.
Our prayers can still reach them.
And last but not least, Hadith 3216 says you don't sacrifice animals at the grave in Islam. It's about praying, asking for mercy, and burying the person with respect. Not about doing things they used to do before Islam.
It's been amazing to learn all of this about how Islam views death. It's not just about the rules. It's about compassion, respecting life and death, and being there for each other through the hard parts of life.
I agree. It's been a really enriching experience.
The Sunan Abu Dawud's Book 14 on funerals, it's not just a list of rules. It's full of Islamic values. Compassion, respect for life and death, and supporting each other.
It shows how important the human body is, how to grieve in a healthy way, how to support each other as a community, and how they believe that life goes on after death.
It makes you think about death in a whole new way. It's not the end, it's just a new beginning. And how we live our lives now matters for that next journey.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Sunan Abu Dawud. I hope you learned as much as we did.
It's been a pleasure sharing this with you. I hope it inspires us all to live better lives, full of compassion, meaning, and a strong connection with Allah in this life and the next.
As we finish up, here's something to think about. Knowing that we're accountable for everything we do, and that death could come at any time, how does that change how you choose to live your life?